of thy peace, an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Make me an instrument of thy peace, an instrument of thy peace. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by giving that one receives, by forgiving that one is forgiven, and by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Make me an instrument of thy peace, an instrument of thy peace.
Good morning, and welcome all to this service in remembrance of the Reverend Marjorie Rebmann and in celebration of her life and ministry. We come together in this sacred time and space as family, friends, colleagues, and fellow church members, co-creators of a community that includes those of you present here in the sanctuary, those watching on our live stream, and also family, friends, colleagues, and church members who could not be here today. We especially recognize Maggie's family that is present in the sanctuary this morning: son John, daughter Camille, John's wife Rosario, brother Brian, and sister Tina. And we also hold in our care Maggie's husband Rick and daughter Araceli, who are together watching the service on the live stream from home. To all of you, our hearts are with you in this time of loss. There is a particular grief as well in losing a ministerial colleague, and I want to acknowledge the clergy who are in attendance or viewing from home today, including the Reverend Steve Eddington, who served as UCM's interim minister from 2013 to 15. Thank you all for your presence this morning. We received in honor of this service an ivy wreath from the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is present in front of the piano, and I would like to read the message that they sent. To the family, loved ones, and community of Reverend Marjorie Rebmann, it has become our custom to present an ivy wreath at the funeral or memorial service of a minister in our association. The wreath, a classical symbol of distinguished and noble leadership, honors the minister's contributions to Unitarian Universalism and recognizes her academic accomplishments and professional status. Its shape symbolizes collegiality, the reciprocity of relationship, and the universality of our religious search. The ivy, being evergreen, is a reminder of the immortality we experience in being remembered by those who knew us best and loved us most, as well as being symbolic of the living tradition of ordained ministry. In some sections of the continent where ivy is not available, laurel is used to fashion the wreath. But for these reasons, there is diligent effort to have ivy interwoven. Our hope is to express to you, you who mourn this death most personally, our gratitude and lasting respect for the leadership and service, the life and witness of one who has been a faithful Unitarian Universalist minister. With deepest sympathy, the Ministries and Faith Development Staff Group of the Unitarian Universalist Association. In this time that we share today, we come together to remember Maggie and to celebrate her long and well-lived life. And we also come together to mourn and to say goodbye. We come first to remember who Maggie was long ago and as she was in her final days. To remember her in times of strength and in times of need. To remember her in her times of joy and in her times of sadness. To remember the fullness of who she was at the many stages and in the many dimensions of her life. We have come together also to mourn the space that was once filled with her kind and gentle spirit, with her sharp humor, to mourn the loss of a spiritual counselor, conversation partner, and friend, and to mourn the lost possibility of deeper connection and bonds of intimacy and love. In our service of remembrance and celebration, we are invited to attend to life's most profound spiritual work. Facing the loss of a loved one is mysterious and it is challenging. Even when someone dies at the end of a long life, those of us who have endured the loss still can struggle with that empty space in our hearts that no one else can fill. And we are reminded that life is fragile. And yet we can find strength in knowing that we do not attend to our grief alone. We are accompanied by others who also face this loss or other losses in their lives. And we can find solace in this connection that we share in facing life's mystery and fragility. We know, too, that Maggie's spirit and love live on in the stories and the memories that we share, and so most of all, we come here this morning to invite Maggie's presence with us in celebration of her life and to affirm the gift that life is. We bring into our time together memories, both that will be spoken and that remain unspoken, of a woman who touched our lives in unique and varied ways. Memories of her offering a warm smile, a listening ear. Memories of her standing right here in this very pulpit, without a microphone back in the day, I hear. Memories of her feeding her chickens and goats. Memories of her laughter as she enjoyed the company of her beloveds. We come together to honor Maggie in the fullness of who she was, recognizing that she grew and she changed over time, that she was someone who experienced many joyful moments and also suffered at times. This fullness of life is what made her life so rich and beautiful. This morning, we honor and celebrate the miracle of our human existence and the blessings that have been offered to us, to each of us, by having known or coming to know this beloved human being, the Reverend Marjorie Maggie Rebmann. During this service, we will hear reflections from family members as well as individuals who were influenced by Maggie's ministry, whether as a colleague or a member of this congregation. I am sure that you too have arrived to the service this morning with your own stories and memories. Maybe they started flooding in as you walked up those steps. And I hope you will stay for the reception afterwards to share those stories and those memories with one another and to continue the spirit of remembrance and gratitude. As we begin our service, we light the chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism, with these words from John Morgan. In the end, it won't matter how much we have, but how generously we have given. It won't matter how much we know, but rather how well we live. And it won't matter how much we believe, but how deeply we love. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and to join in singing together, We Gather Together, number 349 in the gray hymnal found in your pews. I'm a solo tech show today. Maggie, the English major and lover of literature, asked for the poem that I am about to read to be included at her memorial service. Fear No More the Heat o' the Sun by William Shakespeare. Fear no more the heat o' the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe and eat, to thee the reed is as the oak. The scepter, learning, physic, must, all follow this and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstone. Fear not slander, censure rash. Thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee and come to dust. No exorciser harm thee, nor no witchcraft charm thee. Ghost unlaid forbear thee, nothing ill come near thee. Quiet consummation have, and renowned be thy grave. The life of the Reverend Marjorie Rebmann is undoubtedly characterized in large measure by her 27-year tenure as the 11th settled minister of this congregation, whom she loved dearly, and her 43 years of living in this place, central Vermont, which she also loved dearly. Greater still are the number of years she lived as a mother of one, and then two, then three, and later 4 children. Among those years as a mother are the nearly 35 that she lived in deep and tender partnership as a wife to her second husband. And across the majority of her 80 years, she lived as a lover and artist of words, an Irish girl, a friend and protector of all creatures, great and small, and the apple of her father's eye. Maggie was born in North Carolina in the midst of World War II. She was soon off to Japan for a few years with her mother, Josephine, and father, Donald, who was being stationed there. His army service would take them to numerous posts across the United States throughout her childhood and youth. Like other children in military families, she grew familiar with the routine of starting and ending friendships with some frequency. But she had books and their words and stories, as well as her younger brother, Brian, with whom she may not have shared many interests, but did share a deep bond forged in those early years of life. Growing up, the family was never without a pet. And as most of you know, Maggie loved animals. She was basically never in her life without animal companions nearby. In her childhood, there was her cat, Josephine, named after her mother, who apparently was a mean cat. She moved to Montpelier with her Siberian husky in tow, a husky who one night ate the pot roast, burned as it was, that she had prepared for the executive committee meeting being held at her home. She later lived with a cat and a parakeet, and over the years, the menagerie grew: goats, ducks, chickens. She always wanted sheep, but she became the shepherd of a congregation instead. For Maggie, her animals were family, and she treated them as such. Case in point, one time a rooster was brought into the house when it became ill and was given a space for convalescence. The space was adjacent to Rick's room, and the rooster provided consistent and unbidden early morning wake-up calls. In Maggie's youth, the family returned briefly to her parents' home in the state of Massachusetts. And after finishing high school there, Maggie married and had 3 children, John, Susan, and Camille. A few years after marrying and with young children at home, she enrolled part-time at Framingham State College and completed a degree in secondary education with a concentration in English 7 years later. In these years, her marriage ended. She became a single mother. While she was busy being a mother and part-time student, her parents and younger brother Brian settled in Oklahoma after her father's final tour in Vietnam. It was on a long bus ride to Oklahoma to visit her parents and Brian that it first occurred to Maggie that she might want to become a minister. Watching other people help one another on the journey, she knew she wanted to dedicate her life to helping others. She told the story in a 2008 interview with The Bridge. She said, "In some ways, going by bus is a marvelous way to travel. On the other hand, you're cooped up in this bus, and it could have been horrible. There was a mother There was a mother there with a little baby. There was another couple with 3 children. There were people of all races, of all ages, and we all helped each other. People passed sandwiches around. People offered to take care of the baby. It was an eye-opener for me, she writes, how people could be in peace in uncomfortable conditions and support one another. Some people have a conversion experience, and I think that was mine. My conversion was to humanism. When I came back, I decided to become a minister. Unitarian Universalism was a significant part of Maggie's life, and her ministry a defining role. Having been raised Irish Catholic, she was not familiar with Unitarian Universalism and was introduced to this liberal religious tradition by a neighbor, Harold Kushner. She became a member of the UU congregation in Framingham, Massachusetts, and it was from there that she entered seminary at Andover Newton Theological School, where she spent many years slowly working at her degree. She cut her teeth as a ministerial intern in Wayland, Massachusetts, under the supervision of the Reverend Ken Sawyer, who delivered the sermon at her ordination. She briefly pastored congregations in Northborough and Westborough, Massachusetts. And then she was chosen among more than a dozen applicants to be the candidate for ministry at this church, and was called to be UCM's minister in 1981. Her ministry endured for 27 fruitful years. Early in her ministry, she spent several providential months on sabbatical as a Merrill Fellow at Harvard Divinity School. Here she met her future husband, Rick Rebmann. They were married a few years later, with the Reverend Ken Sawyer officiating right here in this sanctuary, and Rick joined Maggie in Montpelier. They supported one another in their personal and professional endeavors, and later were blessed to bring a child into their lives, Araceli, who was raised in this church. Maggie was kind, gracious, and compassionate. She had a pastor's heart, which endured until her final days. A resident of Heaton Woods, an assisted living facility here in Montpelier, where Maggie lived the last several months of her life, shared with me how, even with dementia, Maggie would go to people's rooms, knock on the door, and ask, "How's it going today, sweetheart?" As a religious humanist, or as she once put it, a humanist with a deep longing for God, she was sensitive to the glimmers of life's sacred questions that shined in people's greatest moments of joy, as well as their deepest encounters with sorrow. With her great gift with words, she crafted sermons that plumbed life's mysteries and ironies with skill, grace, and humor. And oh, was she a storyteller. As her brother Brian said to me, she could take the most ordinary occurrence and in its retelling, turn it into the most knee-slappingly hilarious and also poignant stories that one had ever heard. And to be clear, Maggie did not love all aspects of ministry. She shined in some areas and shied away from others, as all ministers do. And yet, in the nurturing environment of this long-term pastorate, she glowed and she blossomed. There is no question that the members of this congregation deeply shaped who Maggie became, not just as a minister, but as a person who herself was always searching and evolving. Your friendship and compassion opened her heart, deepened her belonging, and gave her delight and solace into her midlife, her retirement, and her later years. On the occasion of her 10th anniversary at this church in 1991, Maggie closed her sermon with these words: "Someday, if I live so long, I will tell the story of this congregation, I won't use names or dates or faces or even familiar circumstances. I don't even know what form it will take, but you will know that it was you who inspired me. You will know that the universal themes of sorrow and joy and justice, of death and of resurrection, were your themes in our time together. I will do this someday, from my lips to God's ears. There are many stories, her own and yours, that she takes to the grave and to the great beyond. And perhaps now, these stories can be uttered to the listening ears of God. We will now hear reflections from Maggie's family. Maggie's son John's reflection will be read by Steve Gold. Daughter Araceli's reflection will be read by Paula Gills. And Maggie's husband Rick's reflection will be read by Paul Ohlson.
I'm honored to read these words from John Hollovary about his mother. I will always remember my mom, who was not only a great mom, but also a cherished Unitarian minister of this church. I found solace in the memories we created together. Her unwavering dedication and warmth touched many lives, guiding her congregation with gentle strength that spoke volumes about her. One of my most treasured memories is of a day when her love and joy were perfectly embodied in a simple, profound moment. My wife, Rosaria, daughter, Sabrina, mom, and I were at this church. My mom said to Sabrina, "Would you like to ring the church bell?" Mom told us how to pull the rope down and let it go up. And as the rope started to ascend, to pull it down again. Well, Sabrina held onto that rope and shot 10 feet into the air. I will never forget her laughter echoing through the church. That bell rang with such exuberance as though it was ringing for a celebration, for a future full of possibilities. That day, Sabrina's happiness was a reflection of the joy that my mom brought into our lives. The sight of my daughter soaring with the bells ringing is forever etched in my heart, a vivid reminder of how my mom made each moment special. Mom, you are missed more than words can express. Your love, your spirit, and your legacy will continue to inspire us. We carry your memory in our hearts, cherishing the beautiful times we shared together. I love you, and you will always be with us. One more thing I want to tell my stepdad, Rick, also known as Dad, is that you are the greatest, strongest, kindest, most loving man I have ever known. Also, to my youngest sister, Araceli, I don't know what I would have done without you. You took the brunt of the worst a daughter can go through, losing a wonderful mom, and I'm so sorry. I am forever in your and Dad's debt. I love you both more than you will ever know. Thank you, John.
What an honor it is to read Araceli's reflections for this memorial service. My mother was a very bright woman, and not just in terms of intelligence. Her personality beamed as well. I don't think I've ever met a person who disliked her. I think it was probably hard to leave a conversation with her and not have laughed at least a handful of times. I wish she knew how much she inspired me to just be a good, kind, and fair person to all, even on my hardest days. Also, she taught me that you should never mistake kindness for weakness, that you can have all those good qualities without sacrificing yourself and without being walked all over. Mom was not only a friend to laugh with, but also a shoulder to cry on for many. She knew how to read a room and how to be there for so many people, physically, emotionally, and verbally, which made her such a great minister. One of my most cherished traits I got from my mother was a love for animals. We had many, and she loved them all. Most of my favorite memories with her are in the small moments we had with each other, laughing until our faces hurt. But some memories that stick out most is when we'd visit her Aunt Madge in Florida. There we'd go to the Pelican Rescue near her house and to Jungle Island, a zoo in Miami, and interact with the baby chimp and tiger cubs, enormous snakes, and colorful parrots. Although parent-child relationships aren't always perfect, I know that she was always in my corner, rooting for me and wanting the best for me, even though it may not have felt like it in some moments. I feel so lucky to have been raised by such a kind, thoughtful, creative, loving, humorous, poetic, and strong-willed woman who helped shape me into the woman I am today. I know the memory of her will live on beautifully because of her positive personality and all the hearts she has touched. Mom, you are oh so very missed. Thank you, not only for all you have done, but also for being you. Araceli.
These are the words of Rick Rebmann, Maggie's friend and husband. The Reverend Marjorie Rebmann and I met in 1986 at a beer party in the basement of Rockefeller Hall, the dormitory I lived in at Harvard Divinity School. Maggie was on sabbatical there, having been selected by the Divinity School for its highly coveted Merrill Fellowship, an honor she had won for her work in ministry. I, by contrast, was just a run-of-the-mill Divinity School student. Noticing Maggie sitting alone at the party, looking somewhat forlorn and without a beer in her hand, I approached and asked if I could sit beside her. 3 years later, we exchanged marriage vows in this Unitarian church. Raised Catholic and having studied 7 years for the priesthood, I wondered if Unitarian Universalism could teach me anything new about religion. I was especially skeptical about UU spirituality. After all, spirituality's A-team included numerous Catholic saints and mystics: John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Francis of Assisi, Julian of Norwich, and dozens more. Was there even one UU mystic? Hearing my misgivings, Maggie, a former Catholic herself, never challenged them. Instead, she let me ease into Unitarian Universalism, as did many others who came to this growing congregation from other denominations. My transformation occurred by osmosis over the years of hearing her sermons, sharing our lives, and experiencing a community that accepted, cared for, and loved one another. Maggie's spirituality grew from the bottom up, not from the top down. A communitarian spirituality of mutual regard. It was grounded not in a divinity, but in humanity, and flowed from a pastor who shared the joys and concerns of the community she served. Her sermons drew from science, literature, scripture, and most of all, from her personal experience. Although I was the first audience for Maggie's sermons, her reading them to me every Saturday night or Sunday morning before preaching them, she was routinely wise enough not to incorporate any of my suggestions for improvement. One of her closest friends wrote of her, "I think about how fortunate we are during Maggie's ministry to have what we had. It was one of the purest forms of giving in the spirit of service to others that I have ever experienced." Maggie's and my relationship was much more than an adjunct to her ministry, however. It flourished most after she convinced me to re-enter fatherhood at 57, against my protestations to the contrary. One cold and rainy day in March 1999, we drove to Philadelphia in a childless marriage, went to an adoption agency where I inquired about their return policy before seeing the baby, experienced love at first sight the moment I laid eyes on Araceli, knew immediately there would be no returning her, and drove back to Vermont as a family of 3. Maggie's judgment about what's important in life was nearly always superior to mine. After Maggie passed away, some of our friends told me she was now free. No, Maggie was free when she and I kissed the Blarney Stone in County Cork, Ireland on our honeymoon, when we walked the streets of Vienna with the Ballantines, when she and Araceli rehearsed a song and dance routine and performed it for me to my delight, when they crafted funny videos together, when we listened to Araceli sing and gather the courage to perform on stage, when she and Araceli fussed over their shared animals, when she participated in every step of her daughter's growth into womanhood, and when Araceli set up FaceTime in her hospital or nursing home room so Maggie and I could share our final endearments. Maggie was free not in her demise, but in her living as a minister, a mother, and a wife. Maggie's growing list of maladies as she aged never robbed her of grace and humor. Her response to them made her only more precious, beautiful, and lovable. I will remain forever grateful for that fateful beer party in the basement of Rockefeller Hall. I miss her deeply.
No.
We will now hear reflections from some of those who knew Maggie as a colleague, minister, and friend over the last 4 decades.
Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. In 1981, UCM called its first woman minister and soon discovered that Maggie was an extraordinary writer who wove into worship stories, the tragedies, ironies, exigencies, and blessings of life, salted with her wit. She read widely and shared the gleanings from her curiosity, and we grew from her insight. She enriched us with memorable selections from all genres of literature, especially poetry and meditations. To Maggie, literature was sacred text. Maggie's words and soft voice created a deep listening in the congregation. How many of you thought you heard something that she said and later discovered that it was not in the text of her sermon, but it had evoked a connection in your own thinking? That was the mastery of her intelligence and skill. Maggie was finely attuned to natural beauty. Many of her sermons included references to nature and her farm animals, a menagerie of cats, chickens, dogs, ducks, and goats. I named them alphabetically because she would want them to know that she loved them equally. She built them a beautiful yellow barn. It was a place where she felt deep peace. There was a side of Maggie, a fire in the belly for inclusion, which led her and the congregation to action for social justice. She encouraged the congregation to embrace equality, not as an activist, but as if it was in the fabric of congregational life, not only as the right thing to do, but as the natural course. I was new at UCM when Maggie arrived, seeing her in the pulpit, witnessing her ministry, and serving with her awakened the possibility of ministry in me. Maggie mentored me into seminary, and in 1988 gave the charge to the congregation at my ordination in Maine. She brought a message from Dr. Robert Nist, possibly your dentist at one time. Keep flossing. Our relationship as colleagues and friends never ended. For 2 decades, we shared the ups and downs of ministry over lunches at the wayside. I am sure that booth holds memories for many of you. Later, she joined our retired UU ministers' monthly lunch. Lighter memories from our ministries brought us laughter. She was deeply respected and admired among colleagues. Maggie chose this community, this corner of the world, to serve and to bless with her presence and love. for her entire ministry. We were all touched by her compassion, and now let whatever memories, whatever deep appreciation you have, release her on her way with love.
Good morning. It's so good to see so many old faces, faces I haven't seen for a long time. It's wonderful that you're here. Remembering Maggie. Maggie was a revelation from day one for me. Her voice, soft and sweet, and her message, fresh and often personal, were the first impressions she made on me. It was 1984, 40 years ago, when a friend invited me to attend a service at UCM. Everything fit together. The sanctuary, its pews, unadorned walls, the gray hymnal filled with music that spoke of community, social action, and loving kindness. The absence of ritual, Bible, sin, creed. These contributed, but it was the minister who began her sermon with humor and moved into her message boldly, sprinkling others' thoughts into the mix. Ever the sweet voice with a powerful message. I've had to delete the second paragraph because our current minister had robbed me of my bus story. But I will give you the ending of it, which was that after she served for 27 years, in that interview, she also said, "We call this church our beloved community, and it's an experiment. It's like being on that bus. Here's a group of people, and we're all going to be good to one another, and we're going to live in peace, and we're going to do things that promote our life together in a peaceful way. And then we're going to bring that out into the community. That's what Unitarian Universalism means to me." Maggie's sermons covered the full range, but I was drawn to those that explored nature and science. Chet Ramo and Terry Tempest Williams come to mind. Maggie explored their spiritual footings more than their facts, serving up a whole universe to ponder, or just a tiny corner of it. Either way, her soft, sweet voice comforted us, no matter the journey. Once I asked her if she kept her sermons. She said, "I have brown paper bags filled with them in the garage loft." Maggie received a Merrill Scholarship at Harvard Divinity School, and I drove her down with her things for her semester-long sabbatical. While she was settled into her room, I caught a cab to go into Boston. Being a friendly man, the driver asked me what I was at Harvard for. I told him about our minister, Maggie, and about our church. He turned to me and said, "I've always wondered how men got into that profession in the first place." By the end of that semester, Maggie had set her sights on Rick, who was at Harvard too, and it wasn't long before they married in 1989. They would adopt Araceli soon after and begin a lovely new life together. As has been mentioned, Maggie loved her animals: cats, dogs, chickens, ducks, goats. A yellow barn housed some, and she invited me and my 5-year-old grandson, Alex, to come feed the goats and chickens one cold day in March. She answered every question he had. "Are those chickens nice?" "Yes, let's feed them." "What do chicken eat?" chickens eat?" he asked. "Cheerios for now, and scratch for later." "What do goats eat?" "Cookies," she said. Maggie taught him how to hold his hand real flat so the goat could gently eat some grain. The chickens liked their scratch on the floor. She carried a peaceful duck over so Alex could have a close look. Alex seemed to become a farmhand before my eyes, largely because Maggie treated him respectfully and helped him learn how to be one. In spring 2008, Maggie, Alex Thayer, and I drove down to the Andover Library at Harvard Divinity School. She wanted to read the boxes of letters of UCM ministers over time, and those are collected in that library. I half expected bejeweled cases loaded with all kinds of treasures and letters. Instead, we were presented with a cart of acid-free archival file boxes organized by the dates of service by all UCM's members from first to just prior to Maggie's ministry. The contents were letters to the UUA over time, and most were seeking supplemental income or, sadly, even acknowledgement of their service. We took plenty of notes that day, and we shared the pulpit in May of that year with a homily about our ministers and their experiences. This was one of Maggie's last homilies. In it, there was a mixture of joy, despair, quiet endurance, heroism, leave-taking, and resentment from our research. I came away with the understanding that the ministry is both a calling and an occupation. It is a privilege, and it is a sacrifice, too. This was my learning. Maggie listened, but she did not offer her own summing up. After 27 years at UCM, no doubt she was familiar with all of this and much more. When my daughter Maria was to be wed, she asked Maggie to officiate. Maggie and I drove out to Joe's Pond, where a lovely green lawn stretched down to the water, and a birch arbor framed the wedding site. The sun was shining, so Maggie wore her sunglasses, looking real cool. The bride and groom, surrounded by their young children, shared their vows with happy tears. Maggie tethering the ceremony to earth. That's how she was, a loving, giving woman who tied us all together, connected to our loving community and to the world around us. Thank you, Maggie. I'd like to close with a poem by Jane Kenyon, Let Evening Come. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to the air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come, as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. Thank you.
We all suffer loss, whether it be a parent, a sibling, or a relative. But to lose a good, dear friend seems to leave a wound more deeply than anything else. And that's the way I feel about my dear friend, Maggie Rebmann. I'm honored to be invited to pay tribute to this dear friend, and I feel so fortunate to have known Maggie for the past 30 years. I came to this church 29 or 30 years ago, I'm not quite sure, to a Sunday service. I didn't know what to expect when I entered, and I see this young lady with a black robe standing here at this pulpit. This pulpit was white, by the way, with a ceiling that was peeling, peels falling down as she preached. I remember that. And I was so impressed by her gentle voice and her message. And I don't remember the message, but I know that she spoke so gently and beautifully and had such a talent to weave things into her sermons from her own personal experience into her homilies, as you would like to call them. I introduced myself to Maggie, who was so very welcoming and was so interested in who I was and where I came from. She was so very engaging, and I was so impressed. Impressed by her ability, as I said, to draw from her own personal experience. And I even noticed people taking notes in the pews as she was speaking. That gave me a sense of enthusiasm about this place. And I decided to come back to UCM, probably due mostly from Maggie. She just seemed to be so welcoming. So after a little time, I decided to become a little more active in the church. And there was a good friend of mine by the name of Henry Bissix. Some of you old-timers might remember him. And he would come to this church daily and fix things. And he was the property committee, the only one person on the property committee. And he put out a notice for help. So I said, oh, gee, I can do that. So I said, Henry, I'd like to help you. He said, okay. Here's a screwdriver, here's this, here's that. And he was so talented at fixing things. And then I went to Maggie, and I said, Maggie, I'm helping Henry in the property committee. He said, well, then you're the property committee. So he said, and you're the chair. I said, I'm the chair? She said, you have to come to the EC meeting tonight. I said, what's the EC? He said, oh, there's the executive committee. It's composed of the committee chairs, and they're the governing body of the church. So I said, okay, I'll come to the meeting. I came to the meeting, and there was a very animated discussion on finance and money. And Maggie looked at me and saw my very frustrated and sort of an anguished look on my face, said, oh boy, this church is in trouble. Maggie quickly scribbled a note and handed it to me, and it says, don't worry, this happens all the time. We are a healthy church. I knew then that I had a friend. I became more involved in the church as property chair. More people volunteered to help. And when I noticed the condition of the old sanctuary, which was white, no cove, nothing like it looks now, thought this place really needed some work. So we formed a committee, and we researched the history of the church and the history of the sanctuary. And Maggie took a very active role, and we shared a lot of ideas of restoration. And we wanted to know a little bit more about the history of the church and where it came from and who the architect was. The architect was Thomas Silloway, who was also the architect of the State House. and we visited some of the churches in Vermont that Thomas Silloway designed, and they were very similar to this church. And I remember those visits and those rides around Vermont with Maggie. They're so memorable and so enjoyable. Such great company she was. We also decided to replace the pew cushions. So Maggie and I found an upholsterer, and we chose the fabric. There was a little discussion about the fabric because some people wanted bright red, and Maggie said, oh, no, too many churches have bright red. We don't want bright red. We picked what we have, and it fits very nicely. And I said, well, what are we going to do with the old pew cushions? And Maggie, being the animal lover, said, let's give them to the Humane Society. So we delivered them to the Humane Society, a lot of pew cushions. And then we had a chuckle thinking, these animals are going to be sleeping on Unitarian pew cushions. That was one of Maggie's wonderful sense of humor. I'll never forget it. As the EC chair, I always sought advice from Maggie. She always had my back, and she was always supportive. I can go to Hub with personal problems with the executive committee, problems with the church, and she was such a listener and so happy to give advice. When she decided to retire, Maggie came to my house and she said, I want you to be the first one to know that I'm going to retire. That gave me such a sense of appreciation for Maggie, to think that she thought that I should be the first one to know. And then she went on to tell other people in the church that she was going to retire. Maggie loved animals, as was said before. She had a goat that passed away on her property, and she didn't know what to do. She called me. It was early evening, I think. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll get some friends, and we'll come up and help you bury the goat. And my friend Chuck, who's sitting here now, and his partner Robert came up, dug a grave, and buried the goat for Maggie right on her farm. And she was so grateful for that. And we had a short ceremony. It was beautiful. I remember when she rescued her dog, Willie. She named it Willie because he came from up north. What was the lake up there? I can't remember. But anyway, she named it Wickley, an abandoned dog that was tied on a porch, and she brought it home. Another thing I remember was Maggie knew that I was originally from New York City, and she said, I'd love to go to New York City. So I said, well, why don't we? So we took a train, Rick, Maggie, and her grandson, Josh, we took the train down to New York City, and she said, I want to see the Statue of Liberty. So we went to see the Statue of Liberty, and I think we might have gone to Ellis Island because she was so interested in the immigrants that came over from Europe. She wanted to see the Tenement Museum in the Lower East Side of Manhattan because she was so interested in the lives of those that came to this country. We went to a service at All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City. The preacher was the senior minister of Forest Church, as some of you may remember, and we were very impressed for that. And then we went and walked around sightseeing in New York. Such a beautiful time we had. And then a second time, Maggie and Araceli came to New York, and Jack and I happened to be staying in the same hotel. And I remember they came up to our room and visited, and Araceli took pictures of the view from our hotel room. And then that afternoon, I said, Maggie, why don't we take a walk to Central Park? And she said, oh, well, should we take a taxi? I said, oh, no, it's 10 blocks. We could walk it, you know. So we went through Central Park, and it was wonderful to see the beauty of the park. People didn't look at their phones that much then. Maggie knew that she was done with her ministry at this church, but but she was looking for other ways to serve. And when I noticed that the Wayside pulpit had the same quote on for a long time, I said, you know, they never changed that Wayside pulpit. And Maggie said to me, well, why don't we do it? I said, yeah, great. We shared quotes. Maggie had a great talent for researching and finding quotes. And Maggie helped me. We both worked together and changed the quotes on the Wayside pulpit. Maggie would come down from home and we would put them up. And I would search quotes on email, and Maggie would search them, and we would compare it, and she would give suggestions. And you might notice the Wayside pulpit now, there's a tribute to Maggie up there now. And finally, Maggie didn't come down any longer, but I still sent her some quotes and suggestions. And I miss the times that I would bring, times I had lunch with Maggie at various restaurants in Montpelier, and bringing lunch up to her home and visiting with Rick and Maggie. These memories will last forever with me, because I know what it is to lose a good friend, but the memories are there. And we don't know what happens to us after we leave this earth. We'd like to think there's something more in the great mystery of things, and I hope someday I will hear Maggie's beautiful voice again. So Maggie, pleasant rest in peace. You had a life well lived.
I am honored to be asked to share a remembrance of Maggie as part of the service here today. Some of you may not know that it was Maggie that began the practice of lighting the chalice at the start of our services. It is fitting that we remember her whenever the chalice is lit. For years, Maggie welcomed church members and friends to join a weekly brown bag lunch here at the church. Whenever possible, many of us juggled our schedules to attend the lunches. The conversation among the attendees flowed from news to philosophy to humor, but always there was an easy, welcome feeling as we got to know Maggie and each other better. As has been mentioned multiple times, anyone who knew Maggie knew she loved animals. When it was decided to do a service for the blessing of the animals, there was a change in plans. Instead of having everyone bringing pictures of their pets, favorite animals, and all creatures great and small, Maggie led a service downstairs in the vestry where everyone was invited to bring their pets. There were rabbits, parakeets, gerbils, hamsters, a couple of fish, a number of cats, a pack of dogs, and 2 rather reluctant alpacas. There was a cacophony of sounds until Maggie stepped to the front of the room and a quiet peacefulness swept the group, even every dog. Maggie had that effect on many of us humans as well. You just knew you were in good hands. You could trust your heart and soul to this precious person. So it was no surprise that when Maggie was invited to be the minister of the Arts Week on Star Island, that the open-hearted creative arts conferees welcomed her rich and moving sermons and warm humor by filling the chapel each morning for her services. Breaking with tradition, the organizers of the conference asked Maggie to return in this capacity multiple times. Many years have passed since Maggie was the minister at Star Island, but the arts people ask about her every year. One friend from Star just wrote to me to say that Maggie was the best preacher she ever heard. Maggie shared with us the famous Maya Angelou quote, "At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel." We felt blessed, Maggie. Thank you, Maggie.
I met Maggie Rebmann at the beginning of 1995. As a volunteer for the Montpelier Bridge newspaper, I had proposed writing an article about the Unitarian Church because I knew nothing about it. Having been raised a Catholic, I was accustomed to referring to religious leaders as father or sister. Arriving at the church, I had my first exposure to Maggie's warm smile, complete lack of pretense, and friendly laugh. I asked how I should address her, and she replied, "Maggie." I must have looked like I needed reassurance, because she repeated with a smile that I should call her Maggie. Her response put me at ease, but it also revealed that she didn't require a title to be secure in who she was. My story about the Unitarian Church appeared in the Bridge at the same time that I began a relationship with Ann Ferguson. Ann, it turned out, was a member of this church. Such a coincidence. I started attending UCM and became a member too. Once, when Ann, Maggie, and I were driving back to Montpelier from Star Island, we saw a sign advertising strawberry shortcake outside a church. We immediately parked and joined the crowd eager for this sweet summer treat. Maggie was behind me in line. I caught a glimpse of the strawberry shortcake portions, which were very generous. I turned around and said to Maggie, "They're really large. Do you want to split one with me?" Maggie paused and then said, "I was thinking that one wouldn't be enough." In the year 2000, the Vermont legislature passed a law which created civil unions, allowing same-sex couples to legalize their commitments. Ann and I asked Maggie if she would officiate at our civil union ceremony in a rowboat on a pond. Maggie agreed, saying that she had officiated at other stunt weddings. So Rick, Maggie, and Araceli, then a toddler, trekked up to the Northeast Kingdom. Rick stayed on shore and took care of Araceli while we were afloat. Maggie wore gold lame sneakers for the occasion. When Ann and I were preparing an evening chapel service for Star Island, Maggie asked me, "Are you going to preach?" I was taken aback by the question. I had always been under the impression that only religious leaders did that sort of thing. Maggie, ever the humanist, believed that you don't need a clerical collar or a degree from a seminary to have something worthwhile to share with your fellow humans. One time, to promote a church initiative, Ann and I wrote a skit to be performed during a worship service. We dressed in leather and pretended to be Harley biker babes. We recruited a couple of other church members for the skit, too. We later learned through the grapevine that Maggie had gotten blowback for allowing a humorous skit to be part of the worship service. Maggie's skilled way of handling the upset was to deliver a sermon the next Sunday about the value of humor and the many ways in which it can be expressed. She was, as we all know, a gem.
Let us all take a quiet moment now to let these stories and these memories sink in, intermingling with your own. Let us feel Maggie's presence with us in spirit and allow our hearts to fill with gratitude, with sadness, and with peace. And please join me in a time of prayer. Spirit of life, who is our companion, also in times of death, be with all who gather here in this hour of sadness and celebration. Help us to recall that we come into the world in mystery and we go away the same. Give us the strength to feel the blessing of connection, which goes deeper than our human knowing. Connection to Maggie, to all those present here this morning, and to all whose lives were touched by Maggie's life. Be with all those gathered here, all of Maggie's family, friends, and colleagues. Keep them open to feeling the love and wisdom that remain for them. Love that is born and renewed in the world again and again, and wisdom that grows and deepens over time. May all present here carry forward Maggie's kindness, love of all beings, generosity of heart, and spirit of service. May Maggie know peace. And may all those who love her find comfort in their memories and peace in the days to come. And I invite us to join our voices once again for our final hymn, Come Ye Thankful People, number 68 in the gray hymnal. Please rise in body or spirit. As we close this service of memory and celebration, let us lift up our hearts in gratitude for the life of Marjorie Maggie Rebmann. Let us resolve to honor her living spirit and her legacy by fully embracing all that life has to offer, by loving our world and one another from the depths of our spirits, and by nurturing our compassion and kindness as an antidote to life's harshness. May the love that we feel in our hearts at this moment help us to join together in richer ways than before, and in time lead to a deep and abiding peace. As we draw our service to a close, we extinguish the candle of our chalice, and we acknowledge that we cannot and will not extinguish our memories of Maggie or the love that we carry forward. This community will continue to reflect Maggie's light into one another's lives in this congregation, into the lives and the hearts of other colleagues and those to whom we minister, and into the lives of our beloved four-legged and winged friends. May we always be able to see that light reflected in all we do and smile knowing that Maggie's light is shining from us too. At the conclusion of the service, following the postlude, you're all invited downstairs to the vestry to enjoy refreshments and share some stories. And I invite you to join me in saying the words of benediction which are found in your program. These words of blessing were often used during Maggie's ministry to close the church year. May the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. We conclude our service with the postlude.